We were talking about logarithms and logarithmic functions, and we want to graph and translate logarithmic functions. First one we have is sketch the graph of y equals log base 5 of x, then state the domain and range of the function. The first thing that we like to do is we want to figure out how to rewrite this so that it is in exponential form, because it's a little bit easier to see. And so what this is, remember, our base here is the same as the base for the exponential form. So if our base here is log base 5, our base here is going to be 5. And then our exponent is going to be over here. So 5 raised to the y power is equal to x. And so that is what we're going to use to graph. And we're actually going to kind of work backwards a little bit. So usually we start with the x variable to figure out the y, but now it's going to be a little bit easier to start with the y variable and find out what the x needs to be. So in this case, we're going to pick -1. So if we said 5 to the -1 power, well, 5 to the -1 power is 1/5. So the x value will be 1/5. If we said 5 to the 0 power, if we're substituting 0, anything to the 0 power is 1, so our x value would be 1. If we said 5 to the first power, 5 to the first power is 5, so y is 1 and x is 5. And try one more. If we said 5 squared is 25, so our y value is 2 and our x value is 25. So then we can go to plot these points. So x value is 1/5, y is -1. So if I go over, 1/5, which you can't really see very well in this graph, but 1/5 down to -1. If I go 1, 0, so go over 1 at the point at 0, 5, 1, so go over 5 up 1, and then the next one is over 25 up 2. Well, that one's off the graph, so we're not going to be able to graph that one. Remember that our asymptote in this case is right on the y-axis, so we should have a smooth graph that comes up, and then as we start to increase, and then it gets horizontal very quickly. Now we can look at what our domain, range, asymptote, and things like that. So for this one, the domain is the x value. So we know that we stop at, or we start at 0, but 0 is not included. So we're going to have a parentheses at 0, and that's going to go to positive infinity, and that's also going to be parentheses. In this case, the range is going to start down here all the way down at -infinity, and it's going to continue all the way to infinity, so -infinity to positive infinity, and neither of these are included, so that's parentheses there. Our asymptote is basically the y-axis right here, or we can have x equals 0. And the y-intercept, where does our graph cross the y-axis? And in this case, it does not. So we do not have, it does not cross. So there's no y-intercept. We can take a look at this function right here. As we can see it graphed, y equals log base 5 of x. We can see that it's graphed right here. We also have the function y equals 5 raised to the x. That's the inverse of that function. It's graphed there, and that's graphed over the line y equals x. Those are reflected over each other.